Hi, my name is Toni, and I'm here with my little dog Luna. So if you hear weird noises, it's her. Today we're going to look at when the Beatles went to Cambridge. Cambridge? Yeah, they did. But first let's look at Cambridge. It's best known for its legendary university. Cambridge is one of the most famous cities in Merry England, with greenery galore and beautiful old buildings as far as the eye can see. It's a popular getaway spot for Brits and tourists alike. The University of Cambridge celebrated its 800th anniversary in 2009. It was founded in 1209 by a group of scholars fleeing from Oxford. To an American immigrant like me, that is a long time ago. We're going to learn that the Beatles didn't get to see very much of Cambridge. As usual, they were stuck in hotel rooms and trapped with the people that surrounded them. So, let's begin to read from the book Love Me Do, which was John Lennon's favorite book of the Beatles. The police on emergency duty outside the ABC Cinema in Cambridge were rapidly becoming agitated. Great swarms of duffel-coated adolescents kept rushing to the doors of the cinema to ask a question and then return signed to the queue that stretched for a half-mile down Regent Street. A large number of the crowd did not have tickets for the show. What they were hoping for was a glimpse of the chief performers arriving at the theater. This book was written by an American, by the way. It was a cinema. They were disappointed. 4 hours before the curtain was scheduled to arise in Cambridge, the police had driven to a pre-arranged rendezvous a mile from town, and the Beatles had arrived at the theater in the back of a police van. Inside the circle lobby of the cinema, they were now meeting the press. This pre-show conference had become obligatory since the Palladium siege had made them big news. Each of the four was surrounded by his own little cluster of reporters and photographers. On the walls, large photos of players looked benignly down. On the table to the side, a bar had been set up that predominantly featured Pepsi-Cola and a selection of whiskeys. That was their drink. What will your film be about? Asks a reporter of the Beatle I recognized as Paul McCartney. Sort of a fantasy type thing. Well, yeah, replies Mr. McCartney, who is wearing, as are the other three colleagues, a gray suit with a white button-down shirt and a black tie. As he talks, I notice his features, which photographed so delicately, seem much harder in person. I find that kind of hard to believe, but okay. In another corner is John Lennon sipping a Coke, which he keeps replenishing with scotch. How long do you think the group will last? Somebody asks. About 5 years. Will the group stay together? Don't know, says Mr. Lennon, as he pours another scotch into the Coke. On the side of the room, Ringo Starr is huddled on a sofa, talking with two girls from a woman's magazine. George Harrison is standing at the bar refilling his glass. The manager of the cinema walks over to the assistant manager, turns towards the bar, and pointing at George, he asks, "Which one is he?" Backstage at the ABC Cinema, all the performers, including the Beatles, were crowded into one large dressing room. A few of them play cards on upturned suitcases. Others are tuning their guitars. Paul McCartney walks in and out among the groups. "Is everybody having a good time?" he asks. John Lennon, in a black polo-necked sweatshirt, is walking around shouting, "All visitors ashore, please. The ship is leaving. All ashore." Someone comes over and shows Lennon and McCartney a picture of them smiling. "Lots of teeth in that picture," says Paul. "We like to get our teeth into things," says John. A few doors away, in a tiny dressing room, a man named Peter Yoland was setting up a tape recorder. Mr. Yoland was directing the Beatles' Christmas show, which was to be presented at the Finsbury Park Astoria Cinema in London. Because of the screams that usually accompany a Beatles performance, he had decided to pre-record their lines, and he was there that night for this purpose. The sketch, which Mr. Yoland said would be the comedy highlight of the show, was a satire on an old-fashioned melodrama. The heroine was played by George, who was thrown in front of a train by Sir Jasper, played by John, only to be saved by fearless Paul, the signalman. Ringo was to remain mute and occasionally dispense some snow to sustain the proper mood. The Beatles were scheduled to go on stage in a half hour, and Mr. Yoland had only this one opportunity to record them. He had provided them with the scripts of the sketch, and now he stood behind them with a stopwatch as they went over their lines. "Oh, please, who will save me?" says George. "I will," says Paul, and so on. The Beatles then go on to talk about how their record had sold 1 million copies. The bar in the Circle lobby had now been turned into an emergency first aid station, and the reporters had been replaced by a dozen nurses who stationed themselves at the back of the auditorium. When the Beatles were announced, the audience burst into screams that hardly diminished until they left the theater. "We'd like to sing our number one from our LP," says John above the screams, cold, but he is drowned out by a fresh volley of shouting. He begins to sing, squinting in the light, jaw pushed forward, looking like someone saying, "I dare you to say that." The boys in the audience clap, and the girls rise out of their seat and fling their arms in supplication to the stage. The aisles and the area in the front of the stage are patrolled by stony-faced stewards and policemen and nurses. Paul, earnest and boyish, is singing, "No, I never heard it at all till there was you." Some of the girls are now waving handkerchiefs, and the others are sitting in the fetal position. Most of the boys just keep their hands over their ears. A girl sitting in an aisle seat cries each time the lights go up and reaches for the stage. At the end, she stands on her seat, screaming and crying. As the Queen is played, she stops screaming, but the moment it finishes, she starts again. She is dazed, and the stewards lead her out of the music to the bridge on the River Kwai. Willingly and limpingly she goes. In Regent Street, the screaming goes on. I'm going to do this in my American accent. Aren't they fab? I screamed the loudest. When Paul and George shook their heads, well, I've never seen anything so fab in my life. When they talk, it makes you want to faint. I don't know. I guess I like them. But really, Cliff is better. Backstage, a group of mothers and daughters were standing in the corridor outside the dressing room. They had won a contest and were here to collect their prize, the Beatles autographs. John and Paul emerge. One of the women, flustered, says, "I'm her daughter." John says, "These new drugs really do wonders." At that point, a girl comes over to George, who is now in the corridor. "Did you get the comb I sent you?" she asks. "Do have a ciggy," says George to Paul. From the back of the circle during the second show, you could only see hair and teeth. John says, "We'd like to play a track from our new LP," but he's drowned in screams. A nurse says the only thing they'll need after they've finished here is a good ear syringe. Outside Regent Street was swarming with girls wearing sweaters that said the Beatles. Two Indian students walk by.
"What exactly is happening here?"
asks one student.
"I believe it is something called the Beatles."
The two students in academic robes.
"Filthy exhibitionist, what can you expect?"
That evening, the Beatles were going to stay at the University Arms Hotel in Cambridge, and any of the staff who tried to obtain their autographs or invite friends onto the premises during that evening or the following morning would be fired, sacked, instant dismissal. Immediately after the show, the Beatles had been picked up at the stage door by a police car, driven 3 miles out of town, and then taken back to the University Arms, where they were now eating their dinner in their bedrooms. Two Dons asked how the Beatles managed to have any private life. Neil Aspinall said that Paul had perfected such a good disguise that on a recent trip to Sweden, when he asked George for his autograph, he was told to go away. And that evening, the Beatles and several friends were gathered in a bedroom of the hotel watching films. The next morning, their car, an Austin Princess WYO 898, is driven up to the door, and the doorman can no longer deny the Beatles' presence. Pointing to two brawny giants, he tells the girls they are more important than the Beatles. They are international rugby players. One elderly bellboy says, "Beatlemania, I think that's what they call it." And the doorman says, "I think it's called Beatle chasing." A car starts to drive in, and immediately the empty lobby is filled with several dozen secretaries and waitresses who appear as suddenly as a stage entrance and as quickly disappear when the rumor of their departure proves immature. Upstairs, while the chief housekeeper hovers protectively, John oversleeps 2.5 hours. I just want to take a minute at this point to ask you, if you like this, please put a like, a thumbs up on the video, and subscribe. I'll be reading from this book and many other books in between other videos that I do. Thank you. Back to the book. At noon, they leave Cambridge. It is almost a royal procession, although nobody is waving flags. Okay, then this book, Love Me Do, goes on to share a letter written by a fan to Ringo. And again, I'll do it in my American accent. Dearest Ringo, last night I had a simply fabulous dream about you and me. As far as I can remember, I ended up as your clothes designer. I got another letter yesterday from Ron, that bloke who lives in Wolverhampton, where your van crashed. Your van is in his garage, and he's going to be sent free tickets for your show in Cannock. Lucky bloke. He said that he didn't think that my letter to you was silly. It wasn't nutty because he is a Beatle fan too. I wish your van would crash outside my house with you in it. Not a bad crash, of course, just big enough for you to get out and wait to be repaired. I had a beastly evening yesterday because I went to play your new LP and found out that my darling brother had taken it to his friend's house. I was so mad I felt like breaking his only record, Lonnie Donegan. But I decided not to in time. Everybody says how great it must be to have an elder brother, but they just don't know what it's like. Please, please, write to me, Ringo. I'm getting more and more depressed the longer you don't write. Your ever hopeful, Beatle-loving whack, Janet. P.S. I love you. P.P.S. Give my love to John, Paul, and George. P.P.P.S. Won't be long before the new Beatle Monthly is out. This last reference was to a line in a widely circulated publicity release which stated that while Ringo liked fast cars and Bridget Bardot, he didn't care for onions and Donald Duck. Down with Donald Duck. I wonder if Ringo Starr still feels the same about Donald Duck now that he's 84 years old. So today we went to Cambridge with the Beatles. No, they didn't study there. They were not educated in music. But they sure got around. We learned that they had police on duty, and they had the whole hotel on guard, and they had nurses, and there was girls screaming and queuing up in front of the cinema, even hoping just to get a glimpse of them, even if they didn't have tickets. We learned that the Beatles were asked silly questions again, like, how long will the group last? We see that they drank a lot of Coke and Scotch. While the people were waiting outside, it read that they were wearing these type of coats. Duffel coats. That must have been in vogue. The girls were going mental, could hardly hear anything as usual. And then a Mr. Yoland came to pre-record the Beatles' lines for a Christmas party they were going to do. Christmas show, pardon me. Here's the picture of the Beatles that night at the Regent Cinema in Cambridge, the 26th of November, 1963. We learned that some of the students in the area didn't like the Beatles. They thought they were basically vulgar, filthy exhibitionists. Here's the theater. Again, I hope that you liked this. Please like and subscribe. All right, and I'm Toni. Here I am standing at where the original Cavern Club was. It's no longer there. Ringo wasn't happy that they tore the original cavern down, but there is one right across the way. Well, we're just about at the end now. The next time in this book, we're going to go up with the Beatles to York. York is in the northeast of England, and we'll see what they do there. I wouldn't be surprised if it's very similar. If it's really repetitive, I'll cut some of it out. Have a great week, everybody. Please comment below. Give me a little heart. Down with Donald Duck. Take care, everyone. Bye.